Senate subcommittees and congressional committees and all the decisions they make about spending the money, but that's a whole nother subject, right? Now, we maintain that federal funds should not be allocated in this matter because such funding is illegal, immoral, and unnecessary. So, well, it's illegal because, so if you go back to 1996, a little known, that's a while ago, right? But, the government has these big, what is called omnibus spending bills, which means we're going to spend a whole boatload of money, and there'd be a stack. The bill might be 3,000 pages. And you'd have to leaf through every single one, to find out, what in the world are they spending this money on? But it's just some big omnibus spending. It's like, here's the new budget, and it's going to be whatever $1 trillion. And you're thinking, okay, they passed the budget. Any of you that have ever put a budget together for a business or for that matter, for the school, I put the budget together for the school. It can be fairly complex, a lot of stuff in there. Then you have to pay attention to all of it. And so there was a rider in the 1996 Omnibus Spending Bill, what's called the Dickey, D-I-C-K-E-Y, you Google that, Dickey Amendment, which has been attached yearly to the National Institutes of Health, and it states that none of the funds made available in this act may be used for research in which a human embryo or embryos are destroyed, discarded, or knowingly subjected to risk of injury. Unfortunately then, this I can remember in my lifetime, right? As I'm that old, the Clinton administration did an end run around this prohibition because it sounds like great for that amendment, great. Now embryos can't be destroyed. But then the Clinton administration did an end around through creating guidelines that stated that the National Institute of Health could fund embryonic stem cell research as long as federal funds weren't used to actually destroy the embryos. Right? I mean, that's an end around. That's like, as long as somebody else did the destroying, then that's fine, we can still use those embryos. So the guidelines circumvented the intent of the act. Created a powerful incentive for destroying human embryos. So destructive embryonic research is immoral as well. I mean, at its core, this debate is not about science, but about human rights. Proponents of stem cell research know it's impossible to take away the inalienable right to life from human beings. So they're taking away the embryo's humanity by referring to them as clumps of cell or primordial masses of tissue. For example, if I've given you some material from the Guttmacher Institute, and when especially the Guttmacher Institute, which is another one for the scientific community, and its basic premise is the procedure is morally appropriate if and only if the procedure is safe. So that's where they set the bar of morality. Just provided that abortion is safe, then it's not only legal, but it's morally permissible. And you see where that goes. And plus, they dehumanize the nature of the debate by making references to, I'll use the expression genetic material, simply because this is the coming together of egg and sperm and a fertilization from zygote to embryo and whatever we call these, up and up and up. But it's only to be very, very technical about that. But it's never to depersonalize the material in some way that it doesn't have all the chromosomes and all the DNA that would be fully represented in a mature, living human being, right? But when you strip that away from the argument, everything I just said, and refer to it exclusively, not just primarily, but exclusively as clumps of cell or primordial, you do what? You dehumanize. And when you dehumanize, then it just becomes, tissue or cells. So in interview after interview, prominent scientists have testified that embryos are not human beings at all. Yet a cursory consultation of the dictionary reveals that a human being is a member of the genus capital H-O-M-O, Homo, and especially the species sapiens, Homo sapiens, right? So if human embryos are not human beings, then what are they? Are they monkeys, pigs, cows? Of course not. They're human beings. And so in these debates, you'll hear quite often, read of the Guttmacher Institute, it'll be, well, it's human in the sense it's human tissue, but not a human being. Because when you say human being / person, don't want to say person. If you say person, then you go to all 14th Amendment discussions and right to life issues and such, right? So though there are few atrocities whose scope compares to slavery, there are some disturbing parallels between the justification made for slavery 150 years ago and what is being said today to justify the destruction of embryos in the process of stem cell research. Slavery was justified in two ways. It was alleged that African Americans were subhuman because they didn't look, think, or speak like Caucasian Americans. And once humanity is taken away from any individuals, that is, when you dehumanize, then they can be treated like property. They can be enslaved, abused on a plantation, or confined to a lab until they die of old age and are dissected under a microscope. So slavery was also justified by predictions of economic ruin and damage to the well-being of the general population if the slaves were freed. And it was claimed that the United States would never take its rightful place among the world's great powers without a cheap source of manual labor. And President Lincoln didn't buy this the utilitarian argument, despite the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. So despite enormous political pressures and a civil war, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. And though it ultimately cost him his life, he showed moral statesmanship. He's now seen as the greatest U.S. president of all time. Of course, American ingenuity triumphed, and today we have the greatest economy in the world. Now, this wasn't just the Emancipation Proclamation. You have to go into the whole discussion about the 13th Amendment, which was a considerable battle as well. That's what actually freed the slaves. So in the stem cell debate, it's also argued that without federal funding, the United States will lose its lead in science. Same argument, same old. We're told that research will move offshore and the best scientists will move to other countries. These are gross overstatements, since only around half a dozen biotech companies out of close to 1,000 are involved in embryonic stem cell research, and twice as much investment money is pouring into these companies doing adult stem cell research. So let's look at biblical, ethical, and moral considerations. What does the Bible say about the issue? Most importantly, the Bible says that man is made in God's image. So you look at Genesis chapter 1, 26 and 27. Look at Genesis chapter 9, verses 5 through 7. God's image is not based on human capacity, such as the ability to reason and have relationships. The image of God is something humans possess as part of their nature or essence. Now, the scriptures describe a continuity of human personhood from before birth. Say Psalm 51 and 5. Psalm 139, 13 through 16, which we mentioned earlier. Man is not seen as just another animal. God gave humankind dominion over animals. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26. The Bible also teaches that we are not to unjustly take human life. So we're not talking about war, self-defense, things of that nature, but that's Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 17. And then you find it in the Decalogue as well in Exodus chapter 19. So what drives these points home is the fact that Christ's incarnation began with a miraculous fertilization, to put it that way. Luke chapter 1 and verse 43, and then again verses 26 through 38. So our Savior was once a one-cell embryo and a person there as well. There are many ethical principles that argue against destroying embryo. So the ethical principle of autonomy states that no one may act in a way that will affect another person without his or her informed consent. There's no greater violation of autonomy than to take a person's life. So our Declaration of Independence states that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The right to life is inherent in or endemic to, we could say, the sense that is bound to the human essence of a person. It cannot be bestowed or taken away by another person. That's inalienable. If it's God-given, no government, they can lock you up. They can do anything to you. They can deprive you of certain things, but they cannot deprive you of these inalienable rights. The right still exists. No courtroom, anything. Nobody has power over what God infuses into the essence of your being as human, right? Human being, rights of a human being. Sacrificing embryos for their stem cells also crosses the continental divide of medical ethics. The foundational ethical principle of medicine is to do no harm. That's the Hippocratic Oath. Thus, medicine has prohibited harmful research on humans. The Nuremberg Code, adopted after World War II, atrocities involving the elite physicians and medical institutions of Germany, states no experiment could be conducted where there is a prior reason to believe that death or disabling injury will occur. So the National Institute of Health's own guidelines for the conduct of research among human subjects states the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. It then excerpts the Nuremberg Code and states, no experiment should be conducted where there is a priori reason to believe. That means basically it's common knowledge that death or disabling injury will occur. So though the AMA, the American Medical Association, sanctions embryonic research, its standards for investigation state it is fundamental social policy that the advancement of scientific knowledge must also be secondary to the primary concern of the individual. The Council of Europe's Convention on Human Rights, 1997, the only international code of bioethics, prohibits destroying embryos for research and regulates experimentation that can take place on them. So it is argued then, to the contrary, that these frozen embryos will die anyway. So what difference does it make? But shouldn't some good come out of their existence? There's a significant moral difference between individuals dying natural deaths versus having their lives taken by another. If a patient, this by the way is where sentimentality has to move to the side, and you have to look very objectively at what is happening, right? So there's a difference between someone dying of natural causes and then what is happening if you use these embryos. What's the difference? Well, they're just going to be destroyed anyway. That is not the same as dying of natural causes. It is taking their lives. So if a patient is dying of cancer, well, that's a tragedy, but it doesn't give the doctor the right to harvest their heart for transplant. I mean, the first instance, the patient dies of natural causes. In the second, the doctor takes the patient's life. And you see where the slippery slope is. You know, a person in a comatose state or a, what's called a persistent vegetative state. You know, should you just take their life if it could save other people? So the doctor's action would not be justifiable even if the patient's heart were used to help someone else. It should also be noted that it's impossible for parents to give their true informed consent to have their child killed. They would no more do this on the basis of the best interest of their embryo than they could authorize it for their 5-year-old child. So what about the estimated 100,000 frozen embryos in the U.S.? So IVF clinic or in vitro fertilization clinics, many of whom are not abandoned or unwanted, they wait in suspended animation for the decision of their parents. And a more humane alternative to the destruction of these embryos through research is what I've mentioned before, is to put them up for adoption. And this would provide a wonderful alternative to the 2 million, this is 20 years ago, 2 million infertile couples in this country. It can be argued that there'll be much better maternal-child bonding if the adoptive mother carries the child through gestation and delivery. So what are called snowflake adoptions. The snowflake adoption program, the Nightlight Adoption Agency in California already have done this successfully despite a paucity of laws concerning embryo adoption. So John and Marlene Strengi gave testimony before Congress in July 2001, 20 years ago, while holding their child Hannah, who had been adopted as an embryo. So Dr. Stevens asked them, well, what is a person? But are these young embryonic human beings persons? And adult human beings are the result of continuous growth that begins at fertilization. There is no morally relevant break. Again, from you're viewing this video, you're an adult, fully developed adult human being, human person, and you regress a day, a week, a month, right to 30 seconds before coming out of the womb to being 2 minutes prior to birth. When? Where is the break between you as a person and you as an embryo, right? Where is the break? And you cannot detect one. There is no break in that development, human being, person from conception on through. So personhood does not depend on having abilities such as the power to reason, and some will say that. Well, you have to have the power to reason. You have to have all of this. Oh, really? The power to reason. So you have a 2-month-old infant with, where's the ability to reason there? And when you say the power to reason, how developed must the reasoning be? And so on. And self-awareness, a certain level of intellect or consciousness. Whenever these sort of contingents or criteria are put on personhood, it misses it altogether, the whole point altogether. So developmental markers proposed by some for personhood they're arbitrary and capricious. So these markers include, implantation. It's not a person until you have the implantation in the womb, or brain development, or pain cessation, or quickening, some detection of movement, or in fact some say birth. It's not a person until birth. So legally, what is a person? At present, 38 states recognize that life begins at conception. It might surprise you, but 38 states. 25 states already regulate embryo-fetal research. 10 states ban harmful embryonic research altogether. Louisiana designates IVF-derived embryos as judicial persons. Maine, Michigan, Massachusetts impose up to 5 years of imprisonment for harmful research on live embryos or fetuses. 5 states restrict the sale of embryos. 5 more restrict the sale for research, and 8 others prohibit sale for any reason. So adult stem cell, then we should say, because heretofore we've been talking about the most critical, the embryonic stem cell research. So when we shift to adult cell research, we not only find that it is the better choice for the outcome, if that outcome is a therapeutic one, but it's also the appropriate moral choice. So the good news is that there is an ethical alternative to embryonic stem cell research that has gotten Only token recognition in the media has been downplayed by prominent scientists. Adult stem cell research holds as much, if not more promise as embryonic stem cell research, and we are likely to get to our therapeutic goals more quickly if the federal government puts funding in this area. So there's been no successful therapies utilizing embryonic stem cells in humans. Embryonic stem cells show signs of being genetically unstable, and they are difficult to culture. So it's hard to control their differentiation, and it's difficult to get a pure cell culture of one cell type. The great advantage of embryonic stem cells is they can differentiate into 210 different types of tissue, but this is also their greatest weakness. How does a scientist direct development down just one path? So Geron researchers at the December 2000 meeting of the Society of Neuroscience reported that they had attempted to transplant human embryonic stem cells into the brains of rats, and the embryonic stem cells did not differentiate into brain cells. They stayed in disorganized clusters, and brain cells near them began to die. And many reports in the lay press of embryonic stem cell success in animal models misleadingly omit the fact that these studies were done with fetal stem cells that had already differentiated into neural. So in other words, you're moving from, you're passing off embryonic as, or fetal as embryonic, and the fetal already differentiated into maybe some 200 cells at that point. So I just leave off that, because I think we make the point. And you could go further into this, the idea that adult stem cells are just superior to embryonic. They don't have the ethical choice of having to terminate human life in exchange for some benefit down the road. So conflicts of interest in current events, all this data leaves one question. Well, why do scientists from Harvard, Stanford, National Institute of Health, and other prestigious institutions said unequivocally that embryonic stem cells are the answer to our therapeutic dilemma? Why indeed? Well, because there's a lot of money involved in that. A lot of money involved is grants from the government to certain research universities, right, that they want to keep this going. But an investigative report in the National Journal explains that it may be the pecuniary, that's better, pecuniary interests of the physicians and